I was 23 standard years old when I first saw the unbreakable resolve through the observation port of the naval station orbiting Cypra Mundi. The vessel hung in the void like a cathedral suspended in nothing. 7 kilometers of Gothic architecture and weapon batteries, every surface adorned with scripture and purity, seals the size of drop ships. I had been assigned to the Cypra Mundi Naval Station as a junior cogitator analyst 3 months prior. My designation was Analyst Grade 4, Personnel Classification 7 Theta, assigned to Fleet Logistics Coordination. I processed supply manifests and calculated warp route efficiencies. My hands were soft. I had never fired a weapon in anger. The unbreakable resolve was an Astartes battle barge, home to 2 companies of the Emperor's Angels. I did not know which chapter. Security protocols prevented junior analysts from accessing that data. What I knew was that such vessels transited through our sector twice per standard year, requiring reprovisioning and warp coordinate verification. They never stayed long. The Space Marines did not acknowledge our existence. We were insects scurrying to serve gods who did not see us. This was appropriate. This was the order of things. I remember the temperature of the observation deck that morning, 18 degrees Celsius. The environmental systems always ran cold in that section. I wore my standard-issue Naval Auxiliary uniform, gray and forgettable, pressed according to regulation. I drank recaf from a tin cup. The liquid was bitter, cut with synthetic proteins to extend the ration. I'd not yet learned to ignore the taste. The observation port was 17 meters wide, reinforced with triple-layer armor glass, capable of withstanding void exposure for 47 seconds in the event of catastrophic decompression. I had read the technical specifications during my 3rd week. I read everything then. I believed information would protect me. The unbreakable resolve completed its reprovisioning cycle over 6 days. I processed the manifests, 4,000 tons of promethium, 1,600 tons of munitions, 800 tons of medical supplies, 300 tons of sanctified oils and unguents, 2,000 tons of food stores. The numbers were vast beyond my comprehension. A single Astartes consumed resources equivalent to 50 baseline humans. The chapter serfs aboard that vessel numbered in the thousands. As the Space Marines themselves were fewer than 200, but they were the reason everything else existed. On the 7th day, the unbreakable resolve translated into the warp. I watched from the observation deck as the Geller field generators achieved full activation, surrounding the hull in a barely visible shimmer of protective energy. The vessel's plasma drives burned cerulean bright for 17 seconds. Then the space where the battle barge had existed folded in upon itself with a distortion that made my eyes water and my stomach clench. The ship was gone. I logged the departure in the coordination database. Timestamp 0847 hours. Destination coordinates classified. Estimated warp transit duration 41 days standard. I returned to my station. I processed other manifests, and the unbreakable resolve became simply another entry in an endless stream of data. 73 days later, the battle barge emerged from the warp at the system's edge, 12 light hours from Cypra Mundi. This information reached our station 4 hours after the translation, carried by automated beacon relay. The delay was normal. Space is vast. Light is slow. Information flows through the Imperium like blood through a dying man's veins. Essential, but insufficient. What was not normal? The unbreakable resolve had emerged broadcasting on all frequencies. Astartes vessels maintained strict Vox silence except for official Imperial channels. This ship screamed across every wavelength, a cacophony of overlapping transmissions that ranged from litanies of battle to wordless howling. The signals were corrupted, layered with interference patterns that made cogitator banks throughout the station malfunction. 3 junior tech priests suffered seizures from direct neural interface exposure. I was in the central analysis bay when the first transmissions were processed. I heard fragments through the station's internal Vox system before someone had the presence of mind to shut it down. I heard laughter. Not human laughter. Something that used a human throat to make sounds humans were never meant to produce. Commander Vatek, the station's ranking naval officer, declared an immediate quarantine alert. All civilian traffic was redirected to secondary jump points. Military vessels in system were ordered to battle readiness. The station's void shields activated, thrumming to life with a bass vibration that traveled through every bulkhead. And I felt it through the deck plating beneath my feet, the deep mechanical heartbeat of defensive systems that had not been tested outside of drills in 17 years. The unbreakable resolve did not approach. It drifted at the system's edge, engines dark, broadcasting its corrupted signals into the void. Long-range augury scans painted a troubling picture. The vessel's hull integrity was compromised in 14 locations. Portions of its superstructure had been warped, twisted into geometries that should not have been possible within real space. There were objects moving on its external hull. The augury resolution was insufficient to determine what those objects were. They moved too deliberately to be debris. Commander Vatek initiated contact protocols with Battlefleet Segmentum Command. See, I was assigned to the communication coordination team because I was familiar with the Unbreakable Resolve's previous logistics data. My role was to provide technical specifications to the naval strategists who would determine the appropriate response. I sat in a secondary briefing chamber with 11 other analysts, feeding information into data slates, while senior officers conferred through encrypted channels with authorities I would never see. It was in that briefing chamber that I first saw Engineer Secundus Caliver. He was 43 years old, though his age was difficult to estimate due to the augmetics that replaced portions of his face and skull. His left eye was a crimson lens array that rotated with soft clicking sounds when he focused on different data streams. His right hand was biological, but scarred, covered in chemical burns from decades of work with sacred unguents and blessed oils. He wore the red robes of the Adeptus Mechanicus, though his rank was low enough that he had been assigned to assist naval operations rather than conducting his own research. He was responsible for technical threat assessment, determining what systems aboard the Unbreakable Resolve might still be functional, what dangers those systems represented, and what methods might prove effective in the vessel's destruction or containment. He spoke with a voice that had been partially synthesized, organic vocal cords augmented with vox modulators that gave his words a faint mechanical resonance. The effect was unsettling at first. It sounded as though two people spoke simultaneously, offset by a fraction of a second. But his words were precise. He wasted nothing. And when the senior staff asked questions, he provided answers with mathematical exactness. He did not speculate. He calculated probabilities and presented them without embellishment. The vessel's plasma reactor core will remain functional for approximately 470 days without maintenance, he stated during the third briefing session. The Geller field generators have failed, as evidenced by the warp corruption visible on the hull. Without Geller protection, the ship should have been consumed entirely during warp transit. That it survived indicates either the presence of protective entities aboard the vessel or a fundamental alteration to the ship's relationship with Imperium physics. Both possibilities are catastrophic. Commander Vatek asked what weapons might prove effective. Sir Caliver consulted his data slate for 7 seconds before responding. Standard naval ordnance will damage but not destroy an Astartes battle barge. The vessel's armor plating is layered ceramite and adamantium, 3 meters thick at critical points. Plasma torpedo spreads targeting the reactor core represent the highest probability of achieving catastrophic systems failure. However, targeting accuracy at void combat ranges is insufficient to guarantee precise strikes. A sustained bombardment campaign lasting between 40 and 90 days standard would be required to ensure complete destruction. This assumes the vessel does not maneuver, does not return fire, and does not attempt translation back into warp space. And if it does those things? Vathek asked. Caliver's crimson lens rotated, focusing on the commander. Then the timeline extends significantly, potentially months. The engagement would require multiple capital ships operating in coordinated strike patterns. Casualties would be considerable. I watched him as he spoke. There was something in his manner that I found compelling. He did not soften his assessments. He did not offer false comfort. The universe was mathematics to him, physics and probability, and he reported the equations without concern for how they made others feel. This struck me as honest in a way I rarely encountered. Most officers padded their reports with qualifying language, hedging their predictions against the possibility of being proven wrong. Caliver simply stated what the data indicated and allowed others to decide how to respond. The Battlefleet Command responded to Commander Vatek's reports with a tactical deployment order. 3 vessels were redirected to Cypra Mundi, the Wrath Eternal, a Luna-class cruiser, the Blade of Justice, a Dauntless-class light cruiser, and the Immovable, a Dictator-class cruiser. Combined, these vessels carried enough firepower to reduce a planetary continent to ash. Their transit to our system would require 11 days at maximum real space speed. During those 11 days, the unbreakable resolve drifted. It did not alter course. It did not cease its corrupted transmissions. Attempts at Vox communication went unanswered. The Adeptus Astartes were contacted through official channels. The chapter whose battle barge had been compromised dispatched a single encrypted message to Battlefleet Command. The vessel and all aboard are lost. Not cleanse it with fire. The Emperor's mercy upon their souls. I processed that message as part of the communication logs. I noted the phrasing, not destroy the ship, but cleanse it with fire. Not eliminate the threat, but mercy upon their souls. The Astartes themselves acknowledged that something had survived aboard that vessel. Something that had once been their brothers. Something that was no longer worthy of brotherhood. The implication was clear. I did not need it explained. Engineer Secundus Caliver established a workspace in the analysis bay adjacent to my station. He required access to the station's augury feeds and sensor archives. I was assigned to assist him because I had maintained the Unbreakable Resolve's logistics data. For 3 days, we worked in proximity, analyzing scan data and calculating probable corruption vectors. He rarely spoke except to request specific information. I provided it. We developed an efficient working pattern. On the 4th day, as we reviewed augury scans showing the objects moving on the battle barge's hull, Caliver paused his work and turned his attention to me. Both eyes, biological and augmetic, focused on my face. "You comprehend the nature of what we observe," he said. It was not a question. "Warp corruption," I replied. The ship was possessed during transit. Possessed. He repeated the word as though testing its weight. Inaccurate terminology, but functionally sufficient. The vessel passed through the Imperium without Geller field protection. Entities that exist within that realm achieved penetration of the hull and likely consumed or converted all biological organisms aboard. What remains is a vessel operated by hostile, non-human intelligence wearing human shapes. Or what used to be human shapes. I asked him if he had seen such things before. His crimson lens rotated, focusing on something beyond my shoulder, perhaps accessing memory files through internal augmetic systems. "Twice," he said. "Once during my training on Mars, archived data from the Horus Heresy. Once during my assignment to Battlefleet Obscurus, where a possessed transport vessel was destroyed by cyclonic torpedo. I observed the engagement from sensor distance. The transport attempted to ram the Imperial vessel conducting the bombardment. It failed, and the possessed crew continued operating the ship's systems even as the hull breached and void exposure should have killed anything organic. They worked the controls in vacuum for 4 minutes and 17 seconds before the reactor detonated. I calculated that human tissues would have explosively decompressed within 43 seconds. Whatever operated those controls was no longer constrained by biological limitations. He spoke without emotion, but I detected something beneath the synthetic overlay of his voice. Not fear, precisely. Respect, perhaps. Recognition of an enemy that operated outside expected parameters. He was a man accustomed to understanding systems through mathematics, and he had witnessed a system that defied calculation. The 3 Imperial vessels arrived on schedule, and I watched their emergence from the warp through the observation port. 3 flashes of displaced reality as they translated at the system's edge, 5 light hours from the corrupted battle barge. They accelerated immediately, plasma drives burning at full output as they moved into engagement formation. The Wrath Eternal took central position, flanked by the lighter cruisers in a spearhead pattern designed to maximize firing angles while minimizing the battle barge's ability to concentrate return fire on a single target. Except the battle barge had not fired. Not yet. It drifted, engines cold, broadcasting its endless corrupted transmissions. Commander Vathek received strategic command authority over the engagement. Our station became the coordinated information hub, processing augury data from all 3 vessels and providing targeting solutions to the fleet commanders. I was part of a 12-person team maintaining the data streams. Caliver advised on technical matters, optimal firing patterns, structural weak points, probability assessments of various ordnance types. We worked 18-hour shifts. The station's mess hall operated continuously. I consumed nutrient paste and recaf, slept 4 hours in crew quarters, returned to my station. The cycle repeated. The engagement began 41 hours after the Imperial fleet achieved in-system position. The Wrath Eternal commenced bombardment at extreme range, launching a spread of 18 plasma torpedoes in a calculated pattern targeting the battle barge's reactor core and engine assemblies. Transit time from launch to impact: 7 minutes, up to 41 seconds. I watched the augury data as the torpedoes crossed the void. I watched as the battle barge's point defense systems activated. Last fire in vacuum is invisible to standard human vision, but augury sensors detected the energy discharge as the battle barge's turrets opened fire. 12 torpedoes were destroyed before impact. 6 reached the target. Explosions bloomed across the battle barge's hull, plasma detonations that registered as brief stars on the thermal scans. Armor plating vaporized. Secondary explosions indicated successful penetration of internal systems. The damage was superficial. The battle barge's structural integrity remained at 87%. Its reactor continued functioning, and then it moved. Plasma drives ignited along the aft section, no burning with a sickly violet luminescence that registered incorrectly on standard augury equipment. The ship accelerated, not away from the Imperial fleet, but directly toward it. Velocity calculations indicated impossible thrust ratios. The unbreakable resolve should not have been capable of such acceleration with visible damage to its engine assemblies. Yet it moved, closing the distance between itself and the Imperial vessels at a rate that forced the fleet to alter formation to avoid a ramming engagement. Caliver observed the augury data in silence for 11 seconds, then spoke. The ship is not operating according to standard Imperial propulsion principles. The thrust-to-mass ratio is incorrect by a factor of 3.7. Either the vessel's mass has decreased significantly, or an external force is providing additional acceleration. Neither explanation is physically sound according to established reality metrics. I asked him what that meant. He turned his augmetic eye toward me. It means we are engaged with a vessel that no longer obeys the laws of physics we utilize for tactical calculations. Our firing solutions are based on predicted movement patterns. If the enemy vessel can maneuver outside those parameters, our accuracy will be degraded. The engagement timeline will extend. Casualties will increase. He was correct. The battle continued for 6 days before the Imperial fleet achieved significant damage to the battle barge's propulsion systems. During those 6 days, the Unbreakable Resolve demonstrated capabilities that should not have been possible. It evaded torpedo spreads with course changes that generated acceleration forces sufficient to pulverize unprotected organic matter. It returned fire with weapon batteries that had been reported destroyed by augury scans. On the 4th day of engagement, a lance beam from the battle barge struck the Blade of Justice along its port side, cutting through void shields and armor plating to breach 3 decks. Casualty reports indicated 473 dead, another 200 wounded beyond immediate medical intervention. The Blade of Justice withdrew from formation for emergency repairs. On the 6th day, a coordinated torpedo spread from both the Wrath Eternal and the Immovable achieved simultaneous impact on the battle barge's engine assemblies. The explosions were catastrophic. The aft section of the vessel fragmented, unventing atmosphere and debris in an expanding cloud that registered on thermal scans as a brief nebula of flash-frozen human remains and shattered metal. The battle barge's acceleration ceased. It drifted, crippled, engines dark. The fleet continued bombardment for another 11 hours, targeting weapon batteries and remaining structural hard points. By the time Commander Vathek ordered ceasefire, the Unbreakable Resolve was little more than a hulk. Life support systems were non-functional. Reactor output had decreased to 14% of standard operational levels. Hull breaches numbered in the hundreds. Nothing living could have survived aboard that wreck. But the ship continued broadcasting. The corrupted transmissions did not cease. They howled across all frequencies, layer upon layer of distorted voices speaking words and languages that made cogitator translation systems fail. 3 more junior tech priests suffered neural feedback injuries from attempting to analyze the signals. Commander Vathek ordered all listening stations to filter those frequencies. We would not attempt to understand what the ship was saying. We would simply destroy it. Except the Adeptus Mechanicus submitted an intervention request. The message arrived 7 days after the battle barge was crippled. It came through encrypted channels from a Magos-level authority whose designation I was not cleared to access. The essence of the request, the Unbreakable Resolve, represented a unique opportunity for study. Warp-corrupted vessels were typically destroyed completely, leaving no material for analysis. This hulk, a crippled but largely intact, offered a chance to examine the mechanisms by which immaterium entities altered physical matter. The Mechanicus requested permission to quarantine the wreck and conduct detailed forensic investigation. Commander Vathek denied the request. His authority derived from Naval Command, which had issued explicit orders. Destroy the vessel completely, ensure no corruption survived to spread elsewhere. The Adeptus Mechanicus appealed the decision to Sector Command. Naval Command upheld Vathek's authority. The Mechanicus escalated to segmentum level. The bureaucratic dispute consumed 4 months. During that period, the Unbreakable Resolve drifted. It posed no immediate threat. Engines destroyed, weapon batteries largely disabled. A single Imperial vessel, the Immovable, maintained picket position at standoff distance, silently monitoring the wreck for any signs of renewed activity. The fleet's other vessels returned to standard patrol operations. Our station resumed normal operations. I returned to processing logistics manifests and calculating supply routes. Caliver remained assigned to the analysis bay. His official duties involved monitoring augury data from the Immovable's position and tracking any changes to the corrupted hulk. Unofficially, he was compiling a technical report for the Mechanicus authorities who were attempting to claim jurisdiction over the wreck. I assisted him because my duties were light and because I found his company preferable to isolation. We worked in comfortable silence most days, speaking only when data required interpretation. On the 73rd day after the engagement ended, Caliver asked me if I believed in the imperial truth. I was reviewing a supply manifest at the time, noting that our recaf rations would require replenishment within 2 weeks. His question disrupted my concentration. The Imperial truth, I repeated. I'm not certain I understand what you're asking. His augmetic eye rotated, focusing on me with mechanical precision. The foundational doctrine upon which the Imperium was constructed, reason over superstition, science over faith, the material universe as comprehensible through logic and mathematics. Do you believe in those principles? I considered my response carefully. Questions about doctrine were dangerous territory. Doubt was heresy. Heresy was death. I believe in the Imperium, I said. I serve the Emperor's will as directed by my superiors. A diplomatic answer. His voice carried something that might have been amusement, though the synthetic overlay made interpretation difficult. I asked because I have served the machine cult for 27 years. I was trained in the orthodox principles of the Mechanicus. Logic. Calculation. The physical universe operates according to laws we can comprehend through mathematics and measurement. I believed this without question. He paused, crimson lens fixed on something beyond my shoulder. Then I observed a ship accelerate at thrust ratios that violate conservation of momentum. I watched systems function after being destroyed. I analyzed signals that crashed cogitator logic matrices simply by being processed. And I am forced to conclude that the universe operates according to principles that mathematics cannot describe. Warp phenomena, I suggested. The immaterium doesn't follow real space physics. Precisely. Which means the imperial truth is false. The universe is not entirely comprehensible through reason. There exist forces that logic cannot predict and mathematics cannot measure. This realization should be devastating to someone trained as I was trained. It should shatter the foundations of my belief system. His gaze returned to me. Instead, I find it clarifying. I was taught to worship the machine god through understanding. But if understanding is impossible, then worship becomes arbitrary ritual. I perform the rites because I was taught to perform them, not because I comprehend their function. And I've become a priest who does not believe, operating within a system I recognize as fundamentally irrational. I did not know how to respond. What he described sounded like heresy, but he spoke without passion, presenting his conclusions as simple observations derived from data analysis. He was a man describing his own faith's collapse with the same clinical detachment he might use to report a malfunctioning servitor. Before I could formulate a response, the alarm systems activated. The augury stations throughout the analysis bay lit with emergency priority signals. The immovable's automated tracking systems had detected movement, not the unbreakable resolve. The corrupted hulk remained drifting, inert. The movement came from within the wreck itself. Something was emerging. I pulled the sensor feed onto my primary display. Thermal imaging showed heat signatures moving through the breached sections of the battle barge's hull. Dozens of signatures, hundreds. They moved with coordinated purpose, flowing through the shattered corridors like fluid through damaged pipes. The resolution was insufficient to determine what generated those signatures, but their temperature registered at 37 degrees Celsius. Human body temperature, or something maintaining the thermal output of human bodies. Caliver accessed the data stream, his mechadendrites interfacing directly with the cogitator system. His crimson lens rotated rapidly as he processed the information faster than my unaugmented perception could track. "Escape pods," he stated. 27 launching from the battle barge's remaining functional bays. Trajectory calculations indicate dispersed vectors. Not concentrated toward any single destination, they are scattering. Commander Vatek's voice came through the station's internal Vox system, authoritative and strained. All combat-capable vessels to intercept positions. Destroy the pods before they achieve separation distance. Nothing from that wreck survives. Authorization, Vathek 7 Omega. The immovable altered course immediately, plasma drives burning at emergency thrust as it closed the distance to the corrupted hulk. Las batteries opened fire, sweeping space with concentrated energy beams designed to vaporize small craft. I watched the augury display as escape pods died, one after another, blooming into brief thermal signatures as their hulls ruptured and their contents vented into vacuum. But 27 pods had launched. Space is vast. Even a single cruiser cannot monitor all vectors simultaneously. 4 pods achieved sufficient separation distance before the immovable could adjust firing solutions. They burned at maximum thrust, moving away from the engagement zone in divergent trajectories that would require hours to intercept. The Wrath Eternal and Blade of Justice were recalled from patrol operations. Both vessels had been 4 days' transit from Cypra Mundi. They redirected immediately, but interception calculations showed a minimum response time of 73 hours. The pods would exhaust their fuel supplies within 40 hours, but momentum would carry them forward. They would become drifting debris, difficult to locate in the vastness of the void without active power signatures to track. Commander Vatek ordered expanded augury sweeps, and every sensor array in the system was redirected to locate and track the escaped pods. Our station's cogitator banks were dedicated entirely to processing the sensor data, calculating drift trajectories, and providing targeting solutions to the pursuing Imperial vessels. I worked 90-hour shifts with minimal rest, maintaining data streams while my vision blurred and my hands trembled from stimulant overuse. Caliver worked beside me, his augmetic systems allowing him to function without the same biological degradation I experienced. He slept 3 hours every 48. I envied his efficiency. 3 of the 4 escaped pods were located and destroyed within 5 days. The 4th had altered course before its fuel supply exhausted, using emergency maneuvering thrusters to change its trajectory in a way that confused our predictive calculations. By the time we recalculated its probable vector, the pod had gone dark, drifting without power signature somewhere in the system's outer asteroid fields. The volume of space that required searching encompassed approximately 4 billion cubic kilometers. The search continued for 2 months. 47 vessels were diverted to systematic grid-pattern augury sweeps of the asteroid fields. They found debris. They found ore-rich asteroids. They found 3 abandoned mining stations dating back to the Imperium's original colonization of the system. They did not find the 4th escape pod. During those 2 months, the bureaucratic dispute over the Unbreakable Resolve's hulk escalated to the attention of the Inquisition. But a representative of the Ordo Malleus arrived aboard our station on the 63rd day of the search operation. I did not see him directly. Inquisitorial personnel operated through sealed chambers and encrypted channels. What I observed was the effect of his presence, senior staff moving with nervous precision, security protocols increasing to paranoid levels, and whispered conversations that ceased abruptly whenever junior personnel approached. The Inquisition's position was clear. The corrupted hulk represented a contamination risk that superseded both naval operational authority and Mechanicus research interests. It should be destroyed immediately through cyclonic torpedo bombardment, ensuring complete molecular disintegration. No study, no salvage, no exceptions. And the Mechanicus countered that such destruction would waste an irreplaceable research opportunity. The corruption mechanisms could be studied from safe distance using servitor drones and automated analysis systems. Knowledge gained might provide insights into more effective anti-demon warfare protocols. The potential benefits to the Imperium's long-term security outweighed the immediate contamination risk. The Navy maintained that operational command authority rested with Commander Vatek, who had already issued destruction orders. Any delay in executing those orders invited additional risk. The escape pods had demonstrated that the corrupted vessel retained capacity for organized action. Further delay might allow additional contamination vectors to emerge. 3 factions, 3 competing authorities, 3 months of escalating appeals through bureaucratic channels that stretched across light years and required weeks for each communication cycle. During those 3 months, the Unbreakable Resolve's hulk drifted deeper into the system, pulled gradually toward the inner worlds by Cypra Mundi's gravitational influence. Its velocity was minimal, measured in meters per second, but space permits patient momentum. The hulk would fall inward for years, eventually achieving sufficient velocity that course correction would become impossible without massive expenditure of fuel and effort. I calculated the trajectory during my 4th month of extended duty. The mathematics were straightforward. Assuming no intervention, the hulk would pass within orbital distance of Cyprus Secundus in approximately 7 years, 4 months. Cyprus Secundus was a hive world, 40 billion inhabitants, industrial output sufficient to supply 3 subsector battle groups. A corrupted hulk falling into that planet's gravity well would be catastrophic, regardless of whether anything aboard remained active. I reported this calculation to Caliver. He reviewed my work, verified the mathematics, and forwarded the analysis to Commander Vathek with a notation indicating critical priority. The response came 14 hours later, acknowledged and forwarded to relevant authorities. No action specified, no timeline provided. "They're waiting for someone else to make the decision," Caliver said, his synthetic voice flat. "Naval Command doesn't want responsibility for defying the Inquisition. The Inquisition doesn't want to destroy potential evidence without Mechanicus approval. But the Mechanicus doesn't want to yield research access without guaranteed compensation. So they debate while the hulk drifts inward. In 7 years, when it threatens Cyprus Secundus, different officers will hold these positions. Different authorities will bear responsibility. The bureaucracy protects itself by distributing culpability across time." "That's insane," I said. The words emerged before I considered their implications. Criticism of imperial authority was dangerous. Caliver's crimson lens focused on me. Insane implies irrational action. This is perfectly rational from the perspective of self-preservation. Each faction acts to minimize its institutional risk. The cumulative result is paralysis, but no individual bears blame for that paralysis. This is how the Imperium functions. No one is responsible because everyone is responsible. By the time the consequences arrive, those who made the decisions are dead, transferred, or promoted beyond accountability. I had no response. I returned to my duty station and continued processing augury data from the search vessels still sweeping the asteroid fields for the 4th escape pod. They had not found it. Probability calculations suggested they would not find it. The pod was likely damaged, its occupants dead from life support failure or void exposure. But likely was not certainty, and uncertainty demanded continued resource expenditure until certainty could be achieved. 6 months after the initial engagement, the search was declared concluded. The 4th escape pod was listed as destroyed presumed. Its failure to appear after systematic sweeps considered sufficient evidence of its non-viability. The diverted vessels returned to standard patrol operations. Our station's operational tempo decreased to normal levels. I returned to 8-hour shifts, processing logistics manifests. The rhythm of routine swallowed the previous months like water closing over a dropped stone. The bureaucratic dispute continued. Appeals and counter-appeals moved through channels at the speed of astropathic communication and administrative processing. Years passed. I was promoted to Analyst Grade 3, then Grade 2. My duties expanded to include training junior personnel who arrived at the station with the same soft hands and naive belief in information's protective value that I had once possessed. I taught them to process manifests efficiently. And I did not tell them that efficiency was irrelevant when decisions took years to finalize. Caliver remained at the station. His assignment had become permanent through bureaucratic inertia. The Mechanicus wanted him positioned to access the Unbreakable Resolve if permission for study was ever granted. The Navy wanted his technical expertise available for ongoing monitoring operations. The Inquisition wanted a mechanicus representative they could hold accountable if contamination spread. So he remained, fulfilling all three roles simultaneously, serving masters who were themselves locked in dispute. We worked in proximity most days. Our initial professional relationship had evolved into something resembling friendship, though neither of us acknowledged this explicitly. We shared recaf during breaks between shifts. We discussed technical matters and occasionally philosophical questions. He told me about his training on Mars, the vast forged temples where he had learned to worship the Omnissiah through understanding of sacred mechanisms. I told him about my childhood on an agri-world, the endless grain fields and the way wind moved through crops like ocean waves. These conversations were brief, inserted between data processing tasks, but they provided structure to time that would otherwise have been indistinguishable. During the third year of the dispute, Caliver received notification that his request for additional augmentation had been approved. He would transfer temporarily to the Mechanicus Shrine on Cypra Tertius for a 3-month surgical cycle, returning with enhanced cognitive processing arrays and improved sensory apparatus. He showed me the approval documentation with something I interpreted as satisfaction, though his synthesized voice made emotional nuance difficult to detect. 17 years I've submitted this request, he said. 17 years of bureaucratic processing before approval. But the Omnissiah's will expresses through patience. I will return more capable of serving the machine god's purposes. I asked him what specific augmentations he would receive. He explained in technical detail that exceeded my comprehension. Neural lace threading through his cerebral cortex, quantum computational matrices integrated with his existing cogitator implants, sensory organs replaced with multispectrum analysis arrays. The surgery would take 47 days. Recovery would require another 38. He would emerge enhanced, more machine than flesh, not closer to the Omnissiah's sacred design. Will you still be yourself? I asked. The question was foolish, revealing attachment I should have suppressed. His crimson lens rotated, focusing on me with mechanical precision. Define myself. I am already 41% augmetic by mass. The consciousness you identify as Caliver exists as electrical patterns in biological neurons and synthetic matrices. Adding additional matrices will expand capacity without eliminating existing patterns. I will be more myself, not less. Memory and processing capability will increase. Emotional variance will decrease. This is optimal. He departed 3 days later aboard a supply transport. I watched his shuttle detach from the station through the observation port, the same port where I had first seen the unbreakable resolve years before. But the shuttle was a small, bright spark against the void, dwindling to nothing as it accelerated towards Cypra Tertius. I logged his departure in the personnel database. Enginseer Secundus Caliver, temporary transfer, estimated return date 91 days. Then I returned to my station and processed manifests. The work continued without him. Junior tech priests maintained the augury monitoring systems. I provided coordination between the technical staff and naval command. The routine was sustainable but hollow. I had not realized how much I relied on his presence until its absence created empty spaces in my daily pattern. I ate alone in the mess hall. I reviewed data without anyone to discuss findings with. Time passed, measured in duty shifts and manifests processed, each day functionally identical to the previous. And on the 73rd day after his departure, I received notification through official channels. Enginseer Secundus Caliver had suffered catastrophic complications during the final surgical procedure. Neural rejection cascade. Despite immediate intervention by senior genitors, consciousness patterns had degraded beyond recovery threshold. Physical corpus remained viable through life support machinery, but the individual identity designated Caliver had ceased to exist. His augmented components would be reclaimed for sacred use in other servants of the Omnissiah. His biological remains would be processed according to Mechanicus protocols. The machine god had called him to unity with the sacred machine. I read the notification 3 times. The words were clinical, precise, formatted according to standard death notification templates. As to cause of death, neural rejection cascade. Time of death, 0347 hours, Cypra Tertius, local time. Disposition of remains, pending Mechanicus reclamation protocols. All information necessary for personnel database, updates and duty reassignments. All information conveyed without wasted language or emotional content. I sat at my duty station for 11 minutes without moving. Other analysts continued their work around me, processing data streams and updating manifests. The station operated according to its established rhythm. Nothing had changed except that one individual no longer existed. The Imperium was vast. People died constantly. One failed augmentation procedure among billions of daily deaths was statistically insignificant. I updated the personnel database. Status: deceased. Position: vacant. And replacement: pending assignment from Mechanicus Shrine. I submitted the updates and returned to processing manifests. A supply transport required reprovisioning calculations. I calculated them. A patrol vessel needed warp route verification. I verified it. The work continued because the work always continued. That night I lay in my crew quarters, unable to achieve sleep. The compartment was 3 meters by 2, temperature maintained at 19 degrees Celsius, illumination reduced to minimal safety levels. I had occupied this space for 6 years. I knew every rivet in the ceiling, every imperfection in the deck plating. I'd spent thousands of hours here, sleeping and waking according to duty cycle requirements. The space had never felt empty before. So I thought about Caliver's question from years before. Did I believe in the imperial truth? I'd given a diplomatic answer then, deflecting the dangerous implications of honest response. Now, alone in darkness, I considered the question properly. Did I believe the universe was comprehensible through reason and mathematics? Did I believe the Imperium operated according to logical principles that served humanity's benefit? I had watched 3 imperial factions dispute jurisdiction over a corrupted hulk for 3 years, while that hulk drifted inward toward inhabited worlds. I had watched resources expended hunting a single escape pod while the primary threat remained unresolved. I had watched a man undergo surgery intended to improve his service to the Imperium, only to die because the procedure's complexity exceeded safe implementation parameters. I had watched decisions deferred and responsibilities dispersed until accountability disappeared entirely. The Imperium was vast. Decisions required coordination across light years. Perfect efficiency was impossible at such scale. These were rational explanations, but they did not address the fundamental question: did the system serve humanity, or did humanity serve the system? I possessed no answer. I was Analyst Grade 2, Personnel Classification 7 Theta. My function was to process data, not to question the purposes data served. I existed within the machine. The machine defined the parameters of my existence. Questioning those parameters was heresy. Heresy was death. I slept poorly. When the alarm activated at 0600 hours, and I rose and returned to my duty station. The work continued. The Mechanicus assigned a replacement for Caliver, Tech Priest Operative Valen, 47 years old, augmented to 63% machine by mass. His approach to technical analysis was efficient and precise. He submitted reports on time. He maintained augury monitoring systems according to established protocols. He did not ask philosophical questions or share recap during breaks. We worked in proximity but not partnership. He was a component fulfilling a function. I was a component fulfilling a function. The system operated smoothly. 4 years, 7 months after the initial engagement, the bureaucratic dispute reached final resolution. The decision came through official channels, formatted according to standard administratum templates. I'm bearing authentication seals from authorities whose names meant nothing to me but whose collective weight could not be contested. The Unbreakable Resolve's hulk would be quarantined in place. Naval vessels would maintain picket positions at designated standoff distances. Mechanicus research teams would conduct remote analysis using servitor drones and automated sampling equipment. Inquisitorial observers would monitor all research activities to ensure containment protocols were maintained. A compromise satisfying all 3 factions through distributing responsibility such that no single authority could be blamed for future failures. What the decision did not include: immediate action to alter the hulk's trajectory. The compromise specified quarantine and study. It did not specify preventing the hulk from continuing its gradual inward drift toward Cyprus Secundus. That would require a separate authorization, additional resource allocation, different bureaucratic channels. The decision resolved the question of jurisdiction. It did not resolve the question of the hulk's ultimate disposition. I reviewed the authorization documentation as part of my coordination duties. I noted the absence of trajectory correction protocols. I calculated the hulk's updated position and velocity. 4 years, 7 months of continuous drift had accelerated its inward fall. Revised calculations indicated impact with Cyprus Secundus's orbital space in 2 years, 9 months. I submitted this calculation through official channels with notation indicating critical priority. When the response came 19 days later, acknowledged and forwarded to relevant authorities for impact assessment and mitigation planning. No immediate action authorized. Additional analysis required before resource commitment could be approved. I read the response 3 times. The language was familiar. I had seen similar responses hundreds of times across my years of service. Acknowledged and forwarded meant the information had been received and transferred to someone else's responsibility. Impact assessment required meant delays while committees analyzed data that was already clear. Additional analysis meant months or years of bureaucratic processing before decisions would be made. The hulk would continue drifting while analysis was conducted. By the time analysis concluded and mitigation planning was approved and resources were allocated and action was finally authorized, the hulk would be too close to Cyprus Secundus for safe deflection. The mass and velocity would be too great. Correcting the trajectory would require more fuel and thrust than any reasonable operation could provide. I understood the pattern. I had seen it with the escape pods, with Caliver's augmentation approval, with the initial jurisdictional dispute. The Imperium operated through process. Process required time. Time allowed problems to grow beyond the capacity of solutions to address them, but no individual could be blamed because everyone had followed proper procedures. I could submit additional reports. I could escalate through every available channel. Hence, I could document the impending catastrophe with mathematical precision and forward that documentation to every authority I could access. And the response would be the same, acknowledged and forwarded to relevant authorities. The machine would continue operating according to its established patterns because the machine could not recognize when those patterns led to destruction. For the first time in my service, I considered the possibility that I was complicit in something monstrous. Not through action, but through continued efficient service to a system that valued procedure over outcome. I was a component in the machine. I performed my function with precision. My function contributed to the machine's operation. The machine was killing people through its indifference to consequences that extended beyond quarterly reports and duty cycle assessments. Caliver had recognized this years before. He had described it with clinical detachment, rational self-preservation producing collective paralysis. He had understood and continued serving anyway because there was no alternative. You existed within the system, or you ceased to exist. There was no third option. I continued processing manifests. Supply transports required reprovisioning calculations. Patrol vessels needed warp route verification. The work continued because the work always continued. I performed my function with precision. I documented the Hulk's continued inward drift in monthly reports. The reports were acknowledged and forwarded. Nothing changed. 2 years, 9 months after the compromise decision was finalized, the Unbreakable Resolve's Hulk reached Cyprus Secundus's orbital space. By that point, its velocity had increased to 47 kilometers per second under continuous gravitational acceleration. Attempts to deflect it were initiated 11 days before projected impact. 3 Navy vessels burned their entire fuel reserves, attempting to alter the Hulk's trajectory using tractor beams and sustained bombardment. They achieved a deflection of 0.03 degrees. Insufficient. The Hulk entered Cyprus Secundus's atmosphere at 0417 hours. Local time. Atmospheric friction should have incinerated it. The corrupted vessel's remaining structural integrity should have failed under the thermal and mechanical stress. It should have broken apart into fragments that would scatter across unpopulated regions. It did not break apart. It maintained cohesion through atmospheric entry, burning with violet fire that registered incorrectly on augury equipment. It fell like a stone through air that could not slow it sufficiently. It impacted in Hive Tertius, the planet's 3rd largest population center. The impact was kinetic, not explosive. 7 kilometers of corrupted metal traveling at terminal velocity struck the Hive City at an angle that maximized devastation. The initial impact zone was vaporized instantly. Shock waves propagated through the Hive structure, collapsing hab blocks and industrial sectors across a radius measured in hundreds of kilometers. Secondary collapses continued for 7 hours as damaged structures failed under their own weight. The casualty assessments required 3 months to compile. 40,473,000 confirmed dead. Another 6 million missing, presumed dead beneath collapsed structures. 12 million wounded beyond medical intervention capacity. The Hive's industrial output reduced by 68%. Subsector supply chains disrupted across 24 systems. I processed the casualty reports as they arrived. The numbers were vast, abstract, difficult to conceptualize. 40 million dead was not a comprehensible figure. My mind could not hold that much death. I could process it as data, could enter it into databases and forward it through appropriate channels. But I could not feel it. The scale was too large for emotion. What I could feel was complicity. I had calculated the trajectory years before impact, and I'd submitted reports documenting the threat with mathematical precision. I had done everything proper procedures required, and 40 million people had died anyway because procedures were insufficient to overcome bureaucratic paralysis. I was a component in the machine that had killed them. Not the weapon, not the hand guiding the weapon. Just a small part of the vast complex system that had allowed a known threat to drift inward for years, while authorities disputed jurisdiction and committees conducted analysis and reports were acknowledged and forwarded to relevant authorities who conducted additional analysis. The bureaucracy had killed more efficiently than any daemon. I continued serving. There was no alternative. I processed manifests and calculated supply routes and trained junior analysts. And I existed within the system because existing outside the system was not possible. I had become what Caliver had been, a component that continued functioning despite understanding the futility of function. Years passed. I was promoted to Analyst Grade 1, then to Senior Analyst. My augmentations were minimal: basic neural interface ports, enhanced data processing capability, but sufficient to improve my efficiency. I trained 63 junior analysts across my service. I processed approximately 4 million manifests. I coordinated logistics for 712 vessel movements. I am 51 years old now. I have served the Cypra naval station for 28 years. I occupy a senior quarters compartment 3 meters by 2.5, temperature maintained at 19 degrees Celsius. I drink recaf from a tin cup. The liquid is bitter, cut with synthetic proteins. I have never learned to ignore the taste. The observation port, where I first saw the unbreakable resolve, still functions. I stand there sometimes between shifts, looking out at the void. Vessels come and go, requiring reprovisioning and coordination. The Imperium's machinery continues operating. Supply chains span the galaxy. Millions of ships carry billions of tons of material to trillions of servants who die in numbers too vast for comprehension. I understand now what Caliver meant about worship becoming arbitrary ritual. I perform my duties because I was taught to perform them, not because I believe they serve any purpose beyond the system's self-perpetuation. The Imperium does not protect humanity. Humanity serves the Imperium's continuation. Yet we are fuel for a machine that cannot recognize when its procedures produce catastrophe. But I continue serving. I process manifests with precision. I train junior analysts to process manifests with precision. The pattern perpetuates because each component continues functioning according to its designated purpose. To stop would require recognition that stopping is possible. The system does not teach us that stopping is possible. Sometimes I think about the fourth escape pod, the one that was never found. Something survived aboard that pod. Something that wore human shape but was no longer human. It drifted somewhere in the asteroid fields, waiting, perhaps already gone, perhaps waiting still. The Imperium declared it destroyed, presumed, and moved on. But presumption is not certainty. I calculate trajectories sometimes, during the quiet hours when my duty station is silent. I map probable drift patterns through the asteroid fields, accounting for gravitational influences and momentum vectors. The calculations are meaningless. The pod could be anywhere, could be nothing but frozen debris. But I calculate anyway. It gives me something to do with the hours between sleep and duty. It reminds me that uncertainty persists even in a system that demands absolute documentation. The Imperium is vast beyond comprehension. 1 million worlds, quadrillions of servants, thousands of years of accumulated procedure and protocol. The weight of that history makes change impossible. The system operates according to patterns established millennia ago, and those patterns will continue long after everyone currently living has become archived data in some cogitator's memory banks. I will die eventually. Service or age or random catastrophe will end my function. Someone will update the personnel database. Status deceased, position vacant, replacement pending assignment. The station will continue operating. New analysts will process manifests I will never see. The machinery grinds forward, consuming lives and producing logistics reports, functioning according to protocols that have long since lost connection to any human purpose. Caliver asked if I believed in the imperial truth. I never gave him a complete answer. The complete answer is this. I believe the Imperium is a machine that has forgotten why it was built. It continues operating because components like me continue functioning. And it will continue operating until every component fails simultaneously, which will never happen because components are replaced before they fail completely. The system is immortal through the mortality of its parts. I am a component. I process data. I exist within the machine. The machine defines the parameters of my existence. I cannot change the machine. I can only observe it, document it, and continue serving until my function ceases. The unbreakable resolve drifted for 7 years before it killed 40 million people. In that time, thousands of reports were filed, hundreds of authorities reviewed the situation, dozens of committees conducted analysis. Everyone followed proper procedure. No one is responsible because everyone is responsible, and I remember the temperature of the observation deck the morning I first saw that vessel. 18 degrees Celsius. I remember the bitter taste of recaf, the grey of my pressed uniform, the 17-meter observation port with its triple-layer armor glass. I was 23 years old. I believed information would protect me. I'm 51 now. I know that information changes nothing. The machinery continues regardless of what we know. Procedure supersedes understanding. The Imperium does not need our comprehension. It needs our compliance. I stand at the observation port sometimes and watch vessels arrive. I think about the people aboard them, the ones who believe they serve humanity's protection. I think about the junior analysts I train, who believe efficient data processing serves some essential purpose. I think about Caliver, who understood futility and served anyway because serving was all that remained. The void is vast. The machinery is vast. We are small components processing data within systems we cannot alter. We observe. We document. We log timestamps and calculate trajectories and submit reports through proper channels. And the universe continues, indifferent to our testimony. This is the nature of service. This is the price of survival within the Imperium's machinery. We witness horror through the lens of procedure, and we continue functioning because function is all we have. I process manifests. The work continues. The machine grinds forward. 40 million dead becomes a statistic in a casualty report, acknowledged and forwarded to relevant authorities. The Emperor protects, they tell us. The data suggests otherwise.